For this Alteryx Weekly Challenge, we're thinking about the fact that these numbers here are left aligned rather than being right aligned, so it becomes not as easy to kind of compare, say, the number of decimal places, the numbers that are in the hundreds columns. It's just not easy at a glance to sort of see which are the largest numbers, because this number here could just have lots of decimal places after it. So how do we go about splitting those out, each sort of character having its own column? So first of all, I kind of thought about this approach of, splitting them all to rows and then sort of adding in all the necessary information to kind of work it out that way. But then I thought, why not just sort of make sure that everything has 2 decimal places first and then pad the zeros to the left so that we get basically all of them have the same amount of characters, and then we can just go ahead and split them out into individual characters. So I'm sure there are lots of different approaches to solving this challenge. This is the one that I kind of preferred and was more efficient, I think, but possibly, I mean, there are problems with it. I will say that there are some hard-coded values rather than it being dynamic, but it works for this data set. So without further ado, I will explain it. So first of all, we want our amount to be a string to avoid having to write to string a lot in all the calculations, which is something that I initially started doing and then thought, let's just make it a string before we go into it. Okay, so in our formula tool, we start off by checking, if it even contains a decimal place, because that's kind of what everything's centered around, because down at the bottom here we have a couple of rows that before this tool, in the input don't have decimal places. So we need to add those decimal places to start off with, and if we're going to add a decimal place, we might as well add the 2 blank digits afterwards as well. So that's our first step. And then we go ahead and say, well, if the decimal place isn't in the 3rd from last position, so that's what this is doing. It's saying take the 3 characters to the right and then take the leftmost one of those. So if we're just looking at an example here, then it'd be take the 3 most right-hand characters and then take the leftmost of those 3. So in this case, it would be a decimal point, but if it's not, then we want you to add a 0 onto it. And then otherwise just leave it as the amount. And for this next bit, we then also need to calculate the length, because we want to know the maximum length of all of these amounts. So we calculate the lengths, and then we can see that if we use a summarize tool to get the maximum length and then just append it back on, then 12 is our maximum length. So that's how much we're going to have to pad the other values by. So we just go ahead and do that. We pad left by the max amount, the 0, and you can see it kind of creates that for us. And then all that's left is to split it out into the different fields. So as you can see, I've just sort of manually hard-coded in the 12 here, which I didn't really want to do. So I guess I could have split it to rows and then pivoted it, but I was lazy and I just hard-coded the value. So then all that's left to do is get rid of those 2 extra fields and we match our output. So I hope that was useful, and thanks for listening.